Hello again. I'm Dr. Truce, returning for segment number 12. And the last time we were talking about the chart over here, which we left off at, I think, salt conservation. And we're talking about genetic differences between races and very large groups of people who were separated for many thousands of years during human evolution, roughly 50,000 years after the exodus from Africa, and the development by the process of evolution of very substantial differences between various populations of Homo sapiens around the globe. And we've gone through this list, and I'm going to continue now with the salt conservation, as I mentioned, which is a set of genes found very abundantly in sub-Saharan Africa and other tropical areas because it allows for the conservation of salt, which is essential where the heat is very great and you're going to do a lot of sweating, and the loss of salt from the body is a deadly threat. So we see that the presence of those genes would be necessitated by the physical conditions, and the process of natural selection in all probability caused these genes to become widespread through the tropics. As human populations move northward, into colder climates, they would not require these genes, and the genes basically became non-functional. They're empty genes. Genes are still there, but they're empty. They don't work. And therefore, the white populations of Northern Europe and also Asiatic populations developed these empty forms of the same gene, basically, whether it's in Asia or Europe, doesn't matter. And these non-functional genes work better because of the fact that there would be no need for the retention of salt. There would be no need for that mechanism because of the cooler climate and the fact that people sweat a lot less under cool conditions. And the fact that the genes themselves vary significantly around the globe is an interesting point. Brain-building genes, microcephalin and ASPN, I've already discussed in a previous segment. And the point is that in around 37,000 years ago, according to Bruce Lahn's research on the human genome, the microcephalin spread throughout the population of Asia, especially Northern Asia and Northern Europe. And the presence of this widespread gene has allowed for, we think, a buildup in brain volume and brain complexity, probably mostly in the prefrontal area, because the prefrontal part of the brain evolved last, and it's an extremely important part for moral thinking and planning, decision making, and complex decision making involving intelligence. And so the fact that the microcephalin is not found, except very rarely, in sub-Saharan Africa is very significant. So we have the existence of a gene that does very, very important things for the human brain. We don't know the details of it. We don't know how this affects IQ, for instance, or other cognitive functions like memory. That will be coming in future research. In the next few years, there should be some revelations as to how exactly microcephalin operates to produce phenotypic effects. We'll find that out later. But at least these differences are very suggestive and important. The next item is alcohol toxicity, ALDH2, which is a very important gene. There are different forms of this gene, and ALDH2, one version of it produces, which is only found in Mongoloids, in other words, Asiatic populations. The one version of it produces essentially an inability to handle the byproducts of alcohol metabolism. So the person imbibes the ethyl alcohol and is unable to handle it properly metabolically. The result of that, if they drink often, is of course severe liver damage and possible death. And the short-term effects are, of course, fairly violent response by the body to the alcohol, including severe illness, the usual behavioral syndrome of severe intoxication takes place, and probably more violence, for instance, fighting and so on. And the old story about American Indians not being able to handle their liquor is true because of that fact. They derive from the populations that migrated about 20,000 years ago across the Bering Strait, and therefore they are related to the Chinese and Koreans and Japanese historically, and they have the same genetic predisposition. The immune variations, HLA, HLA is a very significant fundamental gene of the immune system that helps human immune reactions to occur. There are about 100 variations of HLA, especially in white populations from Northern Europe and to some extent Asia as well. The white population of Northern Europe eventually lived, because it became urbanized early, they ran into a variety of disease microorganisms, such as cholera and smallpox, and they were therefore, in terms of natural selection, they would evolve in order to survive a genetic system that would allow them to handle these, to allow an immune response to these invading microorganisms, which is what happened. And when the first ships arrived from Europe into the Americas, you can well imagine what would happen if the populations that met at that point varied in immune response. They varied tremendously. The American Indians, natives of North America and Central America, and South America for that matter, had a great deficiency. They had no genes for the immune response to these disease microorganisms that the Europeans brought with them. They were devastated by this. This allowed for probably the conquistadors to completely conquer South America because of, not because of their guns, which of course helped, but still they were in a tiny minority. It was because of the fact that the disease, the lack of the immune system response on the part of the Native Americans meant that they would be destroyed by literally by the millions, by the diseases brought by the Europeans. So that still exists today to some extent in the American Indians. They have the single gene to handle invading microorganisms, and that is obviously not enough compared to the white European population that has a vast armamentarium of immune response. The 7R gene for ADHD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that is that version of the D4 gene for dopamine receptor D4. That version, people who inherit this, and it's spread around the globe except in Asia, ironically. Asians have you might say, a null or empty form of that particular version of the gene. But people who have this 7R version will have the disorder, and in Asia